light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I'm Sister Who. The question was posited to me did I choose to be Sister Who or was I chosen? And that's a whole discussion I'll get to in a moment. But the other thing that has been going around my mind a lot lately is this, the notion of bullying, and I know we've done a number of shows focusing on that and making comments about it, but there was another one that occurred to me just this morning while I was watching a television program, actually. And I don't know if anyone's ever looked at it quite that way before. In high school, there's a lot of bullying that goes on that is tolerated and overlooked by the administration and the faculty and the teachers. And none of it should be allowed, in my opinion, but a lot of it is because the teachers and the administration are dealing with so many other concerns that trying to deal with the interpersonal relationships is all the more difficult. The problem, of course, is that people who are bullied, it's a kind of psychological and emotional rape. It devalues them and puts them down and puts them in victimizing situations from which they may never recover. And there may not be any blood or bruises or obvious external symbols, but it may so mar their souls that there are a number of studies I've read that suggest that youth who are bullied extensively somehow carry that with them throughout their lives. And at the time, I remember a lot of people saying, oh, you'll grow out of it. High school only lasts 4 years and then you're gone and it'll be done with. But the thing that occurred to me this morning is that those dynamics of relationship follow us throughout life. And the people who orchestrate them, the bullies who do them, take those dynamics with them throughout life. And it's much more serious than is obvious. It may be an invisible, internal, psychological, emotional kind of rape that goes on, because it is every bit as damaging as a physical rape. And the reason that bullying has come to the public discussion so much in the last couple decades is because there are youth who have actually committed suicide because of the bullying they experienced. And it occurred to me that the same sort of bullying goes on within every administrative body I can name. That even in terms of our national legislature, there is a sort of popularity contest occurring, and they are getting pressure from a number of different angles and a number of different answers, many of which really aren't all that intelligent. But decisions are not based on intelligence. They're based on popularity and the push-pull of how interactions happen. And in high school, it becomes more obvious who are the popular people, who are the dirtballs, who are the, a term from my era, who are the geeks, who are the not cool people, who are, the names change every 5 years, it seems. And it's always the same sort of groupings every time. And in every case, everyone wants to be part of the popular group, it seems, though I don't know that I ever wanted to be. I kind of went through high school as an invisible person because I knew I couldn't be the embodiment of others' expectations. And so I chose instead to strive for integrity within myself. And for the most part, I didn't fit into any group. And because I didn't fit into any group, I was sort of treated as if I was invisible. And I went through the motions. I attended the classes. I satisfied the norms, I guess, because I never really got in trouble. I think there was only 1 or 2 times where I actually skipped school and didn't go. Because there really wasn't anything more desirable to do. I didn't have any peer group. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have any situation. But in a similar sort of way, the source of bullying that goes on in high school is the sorts of things that can lead to suicidal thoughts and all sorts of really extreme situations, because the bullies really don't understand how damaging their actions are psychologically and emotionally to their victims. And it occurs to me that the same sort of dynamics exist within our national legislature and our city councils and our county commissioners and everywhere you look. That there are those people who will do anything to become popular and to be liked by whomever. And a lot of the decisions and choices they're making are not intelligent choices. And they sometimes select people whom they think don't count and treat them in ways that are devaluing and deeply wounding without really taking into consideration how much damage they're doing to the people around them. You know, the thought that crosses my mind at this moment, which seems a little off subject, is that this country began with what is called a war for independence, or the Revolutionary War. A war for independence. From the very beginning, things were focused on freedom. In bullying situations and in popularity situations, it is not about independence. It is about conforming and embodying people's expectations and trying to be one of the group or one of the gang or one of whatever category. That's not independence, and that's not freedom. And in every situation where bullying occurs, whether it's in the high school or the national legislature, where bullying occurs, freedom diminishes, and there is not freedom. And in a sense, we're trivializing the very war that was fought and the lives that were sacrificed to create this country in the first place. When we don't vote because we are not willing to make a choice and we're not willing to speak out about what we believe, and if none of the candidates are the person whom we want, there is still the option with the presidency of the United States to write in a candidate that one wishes. And that is a way of having a voice. And you may write in someone who will never be elected because they will never get enough votes. You still have the opportunity to speak and to use your voice. So even in that situation, your freedom is not taken from you. It's a question of whether or not you exercise it. And if you don't exercise your freedom, then it becomes a question of whether that freedom will remain, or whether you will be rendered invisible, not considered a category, not given a voice, not given any say in what decision or how things are done. And when freedom disappears, if nobody has spoken up, if no one has said anything to say, this is wrong, I am not willing to allow this. I'm going to do what I as an individual can. And if that means voting, then I will vote. And even if I vote for someone who will never be elected, I will vote because I need to maintain the practice of speaking and of using my voice and not become one who is accustomed to being silent when the most heinous things are happening. That when, whether it's high school or the national legislature, when someone whom I value is being bullied, they shouldn't have to experience that all alone. I should be willing to stand up and say, I do not approve, this is not the way decent people behave, and if you're going to attack them, you're going to have to attack me too. And if you want to take on two of us instead of one, we'll see how it goes. And maybe by doing that, a third person will speak up and say, well, I don't agree either. And then a fourth person. And when four people are speaking up, maybe the fifth and sixth person won't be quite so intimidated about speaking up also. And when you have 7 or 8 or 10 people saying this is not acceptable, 3 or 4 bullies will probably try to think of some way to terminate the conflict and make themselves scarce because they don't want to fight 6 or 7 people. In a similar sort of way, there are so many things in our society that depend upon unprecedented solidarity. It may never have happened before. That doesn't mean it can't happen now. There is no reason that the future has to be identical to the past. And in choosing at that moment to become Sister Who, that was another idea that with which I wrestled. There is no reason the future has to be identical to the past. It doesn't matter how many times I was bullied in the past or how little I learned how to deal with bullies and how little the administrations responded when I did speak up. You know, that even when I said this is not acceptable, I marginalized myself because no one else was willing to join in. Even in that situation, I still had my voice and I still had my integrity, and I could still be the one who objected, even if I had to object all alone. I was not being mistaken for someone who thought it was fine. Everyone knew, even if they ignored me, that there was at least one person who had the courage to stand up and say, this is not acceptable. And they can no longer legitimately say, we all agree on this, because they know that that is not true. Because someone has spoken up. And they cannot say, they can say, well, most of us agree, and this is what's going to happen. And they do it. But maybe because I spoke up, maybe like that illustration, that at some point in the future, someone else finds the courage to speak up also. If you have a voice and don't use it, you're no better than the person who cannot speak. There is something within you, some thoughts, some feelings, some convictions, some beliefs that may lead you to participate in your own personal war for independence. And so in that sense, it comes back to this question of whether I was Sister Who, whether I was chosen to be Sister Who, or whether I chose to be Sister Who. And I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. That on one hand, well, I guess from one perspective, I'm simply a citizen who refuses to be quiet. And I do want to speak out. But I don't want to waste my voice also on people that I know are not listening. And so I keep looking indefinitely, I suppose, for ways to make my voice more heard. And making this television show is one of those ways. That even if no one is listening, no one seems to be listening a lot of the time, and yet I get responses from all over the world, literally all over the world, that people are listening and watching and thanking me for saying what I said. And to each of them I would say, find your voice, speak out, do what you can, even if you have to do it alone, do what you can, because history will still record that there was at least one person who dissented, and that it was not a unanimous decision to be a certain way. In that freedom, in your freedom and everybody else's freedom, there are more ideas that can be shared and more ways of being that can be shared. If I can be Sister Who in whatever situation, then you can be yourself, whoever and whatever you find yourself to be. And if, heaven forbid, I don't know if heaven forbids or not, I don't know if I would do well there or not, but I know that if I were ever elected to a national legislature, I would probably be every bit as honest and have every bit as much integrity as I do now. Another phrase that I've been saying a lot lately, and I wish I didn't have to say it at all, is that when money becomes the measure, community always suffers. And to date, for having said this for 20-some years, I have never found an example that contradicted that. In a similar sort of way, it was understood within the high school I attended, I don't know if it's true anymore, but within the high school I attended, it was understood that companies were not allowed to advertise, that it was to be a neutral place where the focus was upon learning. And it was by no means a perfect high school. It was horrible. And yet we didn't have advertising. There weren't people telling us what to believe or what we needed if we had the money to spend it, which I didn't. But in a similar sort of way, it seems to me that in order for the national legislature to function, in order for the people there to be concerned with wise government, with what is really the effective way of doing things, we need to get all the advertising out, because the advertisers and the corporations do not have the values that human beings have, and they are not concerned for the welfare of human beings. They are only concerned for the welfare of their own companies, and whether 100,000 people die in the process is really no concern at all, which is why we created something called the EPA, the Environmental Protection Act, that as pathetic and as poorly enforced as it is, there is something that says the national government should be concerned about the environmental conditions with which people are living. And we're forever trying to refine it and make it more effective, I hope, or ignoring it as the case may be, but it still comes down to the citizens insisting that this act exists, and we, the citizens, insist that you, the elected, enforce this act and refine it and polish it and make it more effective and more on target, because sometimes it's not on target. Sometimes the stipulations it makes are totally ridiculous and they're not effective. I'm thinking of a particular epidemic that's happening at the time we're making this recording, and regardless of which epidemic it is, it underscores and sends a wake-up call that it's so important to use common sense. And in choosing to become Sister Who, I also wanted to invoke my common sense, but there were also all these events that would occur that included synchronicities over which I had no control, and the best I could hope was to serve them as effectively as possible. The challenge with trying to be effective, I guess, is that what works in one situation rarely works in another, and it requires discernment and a thinking, breathing person. And so really the job of parents, when it comes down to it, is teaching their child how to use discernment, how to embody it and use it and apply it. And in growing up, it seemed to me that there were a number of times where there were people who were pressured by society to have children who really in their hearts didn't want to be parents in the first place. And I hope that we find a way, through whatever means, to make every child a chosen child and every relationship a chosen relationship. And that if someone doesn't want to be a parent, they don't have to be. Society doesn't pressure them to be. And with all of this, that we also take into account this phenomena called overpopulation, that when there are simply too many people, that we consider having more manageable sized families. Most of my cousins had families that were probably numbered 10 and 12, and I think one cousin even had a family that numbered 19. And in some ways it made sense because they were farming families, and when you had more kids, you had more workers on the farm. A lot of my cousins were driving tractor by the time they were 9 years old because they had to help run the farm. And of course they were workers that didn't have to be paid. And so it made the farm able to survive. That being what it is, it still comes back to this point of saying, yeah, but it's not really responsible. Maybe on a farm, but nowhere except a farm. And maybe because it happens on farms, maybe there needs to be more thought given to how many people don't stay on the farm. And what do we do with this volume of people coming out into the world? And it's called a pendulum of society swinging between liberal and conservative, going back and forth and back and forth. And in some cases swinging to the conservative side, so much so that we have the story of Cromwell being exhumed after he died, put on trial for 3 days, hung by a rope, the corpse hung by a rope, and then dismembered, scattered, and nobody knows what happened to the head. And I find that so horrific. And yet to do that suggests that he was so oppressive to the people of his time that was how they vented their emotion. They were so upset at what he had made them and what he had destroyed during the time he was running the government of England, that they had to do all that just to get it out of their system so they could move on with their lives. And there are horrific things where we just need to find some effective way to vent it because it hurts so much inside. And that which goes back to bullying, of course. And I wonder, when a good person is elected to the national legislature and they go and find this incredibly hostile and unintelligent environment, a place where, as Einstein said, the stupidity of humanity is infinite. That the quote I'm often told, or I often remember from Albert Einstein, is that someone asked him, and he responded, "Only two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity, and I'm not sure about the former." And I laugh at that in a way, and yet I don't laugh at it to create distance. I laugh at it because I know how true it is. And yet it's something that we all have to be part of resolving. That because there is so much human stupidity out there, human intelligence needs to rise to the challenge. And so when the opportunity to become Sister Who arrived, it wasn't so much that I chose to be Sister Who, and it wasn't exactly that I was chosen. I did have some choice in the matter in my responses, but ultimately it was just a choice of whether or not to say yes to the opportunity. I chose to say yes rather than to sequester myself in conservative traditional norms that could not possibly serve the needs and the intuitions that were occurring within my mind and heart. The challenge of that, I guess, is that as I follow these intuitions in my mind and heart, I frequently wind up in places that I never imagined I'd be. And I think that's another quote attributed to Albert Einstein, actually. The one who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. The one who walks alone is likely to find himself in places that no one has ever seen before. That to me is pretty amazing and inspiring. And I have found myself in places that no one ever expected to be before, that no one has ever seen before. Excuse me. I find myself in places that no one has ever seen before. And I think if you had told me when I was graduating from high school that I was going to become Sister Who one day, I would have had no way of answering, because nothing like Sister Who had ever existed. Nothing exactly like Sister Who had ever existed. In terms of the broader archetype of the sacred clown, which is something I've talked about in other shows, but it's a little bit too broad to include in this show. Sister Who is a new manifestation of that, but in that is a unique manifestation of that. But it's kind of within the broad category of the sacred clown, a tribal archetype where see, and this goes back to the question, did I choose or was I chosen? Where do intuitions come from? And I honestly don't know. But I found that for the most part, they're trustworthy. But a lot of times I have to wait a very long time to see why they're trustworthy. And this intuition arrived, and this opportunity arrived, and I said, yes, I have no idea what it means, but yes. And so I became Sister Who, and I looked in the mirror and tried to figure out what looked right. And I didn't know why it looked right, but I just knew that it looked right. And I said, okay, then I'll do that. And then I thought of explanations and dialogue around it. Kind of like the young lady who approached me and asked why I was wearing a woman's dress. And I responded, this is not a woman's dress. No woman has ever worn this dress. This is my dress. And it kind of changed the conversation, because the notion of men wearing dresses was an idea and a juxtaposition she had not previously considered. And of course it raises the question, well, why can't men wear dresses? Why can't women wear pants? Well, actually women do wear pants. In certain circles, though, women are forbidden from wearing pants because they're supposed to look like women, as if someone decided what all women are supposed to look like. But the problem is that not all women do. And what are all nuns supposed to look like? But not all nuns do. And what are all white people supposed to look like? But not all white people do. How are all black people supposed to act? But not all black people do. And so there are as many ways to be any particular category as anyone wants to name. But there is only one way for me to be Sister Who. The curiosity of that is that from time to time, that which is Sister Who is constantly growing and changing. And I'm doing things now that I never anticipated doing in the past. A couple of years ago, I even created the Tarot of Sister Who. And there are some religious conservatives who look at the tarot very dimly. I tend to look at it as a collection of symbols. And if a collection of symbols can help people come to new understandings that help them grow, then I'm happy to serve that purpose. And so when I created the Tarot of Sister Who, I sought to create something that, like Sister Who, is beyond gender, that begins with being a who before you decide how that is modified by being male or female, and further modified by being gay or straight or bi or trans or whatever. It's this question of integrity that starts deep inside, that starts with being a who, being a unique voice and a unique consciousness. Did we choose it, or were we chosen? And I would say some of both in every case, because there are things that come to us, things that we inherit from others. There are choices we make about how we respond and how much involvement we embrace. And then there are additional things that we leave behind to those who will come after us. None of us is the last word on how a person should be, on how any particular sort of person should be. The thing that continues to weigh in my heart, though, is the way this dynamic of bullying runs all through human society. from our high schools all the way to our national legislatures, that we allow people to go into our national legislatures and we don't stand with them against the bullying that they encounter. And we allow all kinds of manipulation by financial concerns that do not share the values and the concerns that the citizens and the people as a whole value. It was ultimately the people who fought for their own independence, and yet there were some people who didn't and became the beneficiaries of independence for which they had not fought. But there were enough people who said, I believe in freedom, I believe in independence, that the War of Independence was ultimately won and the United States of America came into being. Without someone paying the price, without someone standing up and saying, no, this will not be tolerated. This is not the way decent people behave. Without someone being willing to speak out and being willing to say, it's not about being popular, it's about being true. It's about having integrity. And for us to have integrity, I mean, it kind of goes back to that wonderful historical document that begins, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, rights that no government, no people, no group, no club, no society, that no one can take away. These are inherent with being alive.